So welcome, April. April is our guest today on the webinar. We're going to be looking at change management, which is a little bit different to some of the topics we've covered in the past, but absolutely related, because it's all about how do we achieve the business goals of the organization, right? So actually landing the change is obviously a pretty key part of that. Now, April is a project management professional, change management professional. She's literally written the book on change management, so the equivalent of PMBOK for change management. So, she was in there early as the ACMP got itself together and created the body of knowledge and certifications and all that kind of good stuff. She's an instructor on the seminars, professional world, seminars world, and just all kinds of stuff. And as you can see in the background, she's also an author with a book called Ready, Set, Change, which I'm sure will get plugged at some point. So I figured I'd get in there first. So April, welcome. First of all, why don't you tidy up the mess I just made in the introduction and just kind of share anything else that you think people should know about you?
Well, as a project management professional, I've worked on many projects, more than 20 years, and I love working on projects. And part of what really started to drive my interest in creating the Ready, Set, Change model in the book was just this recognition I had that many of my project management professional colleagues didn't always understand what organizational change management was or why we should have it. And so I wanted to, create something that would make it simpler and faster for people to lead change.
That's a great place to start, actually, because people talk about change management, but I'm not sure people really understand what it means. So what does it mean? What is organizational change management?
Well, in the Association of Change Management Professionals, we've defined organizational change management as a transitional process, moving an organization and its stakeholders from the current state to the future state. So moving an organization and its stakeholders, its individuals, from the current state to the future state. And that's where we realize the benefits of the change. So that is our official definition.
So given that most of the people watching this are going to be sort of project portfolio managers, PMO leaders, things like that. So is change management something you do instead of project management, with project management? Just help us understand how they all fit together.
Well, they fit together really well. I mean, if you think about the fact that you have your project management, you have your initiation, and you're moving through your steps, you get through execution and closure of your project, and you have your 5 steps. I think of the project management plan, the project management team, and the technical team as delivering the solution. Organizational change management, we also have our 5 steps. We are evaluating the change impact and assessing organizational readiness. We're creating a change management strategy, change management plan, executing the plan, and then completing the project. And that also goes along the same path with the project management plan. So you have the 2 plans. The difference is that the project management plan is delivering the solution, and the change management plan, the organizational change management, is delivering people to the solution. Because without the people being delivered to the solution, we don't have the adoption. And you've seen many failed projects, I'm sure, because we had lack of adoption from the stakeholders. And many times that's a clear sign of lack of organizational change management to help those individuals adopt that change so the organization can adopt the change.
Excellent. So the word that's coming up again and again, unsurprisingly, is change.
Yes.
So change implies that we're trying to get somewhere, which implies we've got some kind of goal. So where does organizational change management fit in this whole plan of change? Because at the end of the day, we have a portfolio view, we have this strategy view at the corporate level, which trickles down to become the strategy drives the portfolio, or at least it should, folks. If you're not doing it wrong. So the strategy should be driving the portfolio of projects, which projects we're doing. And then within the portfolio, you've got projects. And so you've got change at that strategy level, the portfolio level, you've got change management at the project level. So where does organizational change management fit?
Well, it really belongs up at that top level, at that leadership level that you're speaking about, because, you know, we need our organization's leadership, you know, whether that's the C-suite as well as the PMOs, we need that leadership to come to agreement about strategy and what's moving forward in terms of change. What happens many times, I think, in an organization is that they don't declare their strategy. They don't focus on what change are we implementing at this time. They just try to do everything at once. And so what ends up happening is we have this change saturation where the individual stakeholder, you know, the person who is the end user in financial operations is hit with like 6 different changes at the same time because nobody decided at the top, what is it that's our priority? What's our strategy? You know, I always laugh, Stuart, when I see priorities, right? Plural, because a priority should be singular. And when we have a change priority, that's what we should focus on. And it should absolutely be communicated out through the entire organization. And the biggest piece that I see, or the biggest challenge, I think, for many PMO organizations is that the lack of the why. Why are we making this change? Why? Because when we can clearly articulate the why, because we know the benefit of the change, then we can create relevant, relatable stories of change. We can create all sorts of assistance to help people move through the change. But if they don't understand why, they can't even adopt the idea of the change, let alone move toward it in terms of all of their work and habits and activities.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, the thing that's really interesting, I'm scribbling down all kinds of follow-on questions here. So the thing that's really interesting coming out of that is this idea of how change management is related to the goals, and they should be supporting the goals. And so you've got the goals that lead down into what projects should we do, the prioritization piece. But then you're also layering in resources, right? And you were talking about resource conflict and people being change saturated and all this kind of stuff. Now, most people think of resource conflict as being delivery resources, right? And that's absolutely true. You know, if you've got one key resource or one key team of people that are just destroyed by the level of work, then guess what? Your projects are going to start falling apart really quickly. But similarly, if you've got a target organization, you know, so if all your projects are aimed at the call center, right, and they're getting whacked with changes from every direction, you may have all the delivery resources lined up from a project management point of view, but if you're not thinking about that change management aspect, they're getting whacked from all different directions, then guess what? Your projects are going to fall over again, right? They're going to break all over the place. So how do you have that conversation with people who maybe don't understand change management as a discipline? How do you have that conversation at the executive level, PMO level, project management level, and then at the stakeholder level, so they understand why it's important and how to do, you know, how to engage in the process?
That's an excellent question. I think it's twofold. I think one piece is being in an organization that sees organizational change management as a strategic, an important strategic input into decisions. So here, listening and understanding that there are organizational change management concerns. One of the ways that I think is the best illustration for leadership to see, you know, the impact of, as you're saying, that resource pull or that saturation is I like to do a stakeholder map. So I'll put the stakeholder in the middle of the map. Let's say this is my financial analyst, and then I draw in all of the different changes that are impacting them from all sides and ask the leadership, like, you know, would you be able to adopt 6 different initiatives within the next, you know, 3 weeks? I mean, if it's not possible for you to adopt that much change, how do you expect our financial analysts to be able to handle that much change? And many times what's happening is, you're seeing that top-down view and you don't see that that individual stakeholder, and maybe it's a call center person, is being hit with like the HR change and the financials change. And oh, by the way, we're doing a new system implementation, and hey, here's a CRM. And so we're adding on and piling on at the same time and not taking the perspective of the stakeholder. And I think that's a hallmark of organizational change management, is that as an organizational change management practitioner, I put the stakeholder kind of at the center of the universe and look at everything that impacts them and how to best help them adopt the change, because without the individual stakeholder adopting that change, we can't adopt the change as an organization. That's great.
So, right, which question shall I pick now? I'm going to come back to this one. So a few minutes ago, you were talking about, the project management has their 5 steps. You've got the 5 steps. And for a minute there, I thought I was in an Alcoholic Anonymous meeting. But I'm glad to find out that we're not. We are still talking about change management. So before we jump into some of the other things, why don't you just set out those 5 steps for us a little bit, and what that looks like? And again, I think there are going to be some people listening to this who are really with the whole change management thing. We often bump into people with titles like, VP of change management or strategic change or whatever it may be. But we also come across organizations where it's very project management centric, and the idea of change management hasn't quite made it yet. So it'd be really useful just to set out your 5 steps to give them a quick introduction. And then I'm going to come in with the hard questions. So this is the setup.
This is my setup. Well, yeah. I do have to tell you that there's a point on every project where I get a note from an analyst saying, we need to meet with you about change management. And whenever I meet with them about that moment, about change management, they're asking me about the change log, project scope change. And how am I documenting it? And I always have to say, oh, this is the wrong conversation.
All right, unpack that one, April, please, because I've had that conversation countless times. So let's deal with that. Unpack that for me first, if you want.
Well, I mean, there is project change. They call it change management, where you are identifying any changes to scope or budget or business process or technology. We're identifying it and logging it in a change log, so that we have an understanding of like, well, when did this requirement change and who changed it and who approved it? When did this budget change and who changed it and who approved it? And so there has to be documentation on every project, which is completely separate.
And that's a project governance function, right? That's a governance thing, right?
And
that's not what we're talking about here, is it?
No, we're talking about organizational change management. It's called OCM sometimes. And this is really that understanding that in order to have change adoption, people who are stakeholders need to adopt the change. We can't have change adoption without our stakeholders adopting the change. And so if we don't tell the stakeholders about the change, or if we don't tell them why we're changing, or we don't give them the training they need to change, we don't give them the business process to change, we don't help them understand when this is happening, not all those things lead to lack of adoption. People just say, well, I didn't know that was happening. And that is the worst thing when you go to work on a Monday and somebody says, oh yeah, they changed our system. They've been telling us about it for 3 years. And you say, well, I didn't know anything about it and I don't know what to do and how do I log in? And nobody wants to be that person. So in giving people the tools and the roadmap so that they know what they're supposed to do to be able to function in the new world, so that they truly understand why we're making this change, then they can adapt the change, and that's when we're successful.
Okay, and so the why really matters. I remember I warned you this story would probably come up, right? So my first ever major project, I knew nothing about project management. I'd never been involved anywhere near a major project before. And the company I worked for at the time foolishly gave me kind of P&L responsibility for, a bunch of accounts. So it's the biggest accounts. And it just so happened that a week after I joined the company, they were kicking off a new project with our biggest client. So our project manager invited me along and said, well, you've got revenue and budget responsibility for this thing. You should be there at the kickoff. Well, that's cool. He said, but don't say anything, right? He says, you don't know what you're talking about. You don't know the company. You don't know the product. You don't know project management. So just come listen, shake people's hands, nod, smile, and we'll be fine. So the client project manager stood up, and it was a billing system that we were replacing. So in a big telco, and he stood up and it's kind of, dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to replace this billing system. Yeah, up went my hand. And our project manager's kind of looking at me. No, stop. It's like, just let him do it. No, I've got to sort this out. And he said, yeah, what is it? I said, well, we're not here to replace a billing system, are we? And he was shocked. And he kind of said, well, yes. We're paying you lots of money to replace this billing system. I said, no, you're not. He said, what do you mean? I said, well, you're paying us to increase your revenue. And he thought about it. And he kind of went, yeah, that's right. So we went on, we had a whole conversation about changing revenue. And what do we need to do to achieve changing revenue? That's a completely different conversation to how do we technically replace a billing system. And so that comes to what you were talking about earlier about the difference between the technical deliverable and delivering the intended business change, right? You need the technical deliverable, but you also need the people to know how to use that deliverable, how to get value from it, as you said, why it matters. And that's at some level, that's what the OCM piece is doing. Is that right?
Yes, yes.
So here's the tricky question, right? This one will be fun. Who's driving the bus? The project manager or the OCM team?
Well, I like to think that they're driving it together. That's ideal, when we have a lot of collaboration, understanding between the two. But I'll tell you, usually the project management function is driving the bus because they have the scope, they've got the budget, and we have organizational change management has scope and budget as well. But many times we're a little bit in the second seat. We're not up there in the with the steering wheel. But I'll tell you one thing that really has made a big difference, and that is the fact that when I have introduced, as you had asked about the 5 steps that we can do together, when I introduced that, and then I've also layered in my organizational change management plan with the project plan. So we reside in the same plan. I don't have my own separate plan and they don't have a separate plan. Our plans are together. I love it when I have this kind of collaboration because, then you're all pulling at the same time in the same direction. And the project team understands that there are stakeholder milestones that must be met. And when they understand that there's stakeholder milestones to be met, they will get on board and say, wow, we have to deliver this training environment. We need to absolutely get this UAT completed so we can take that cut and get the training environment created. That's a project team task, but it's owned by the organizational change management team. So when we have this collaboration, this understanding together, I think we can accomplish so much more because we really understand what people need from us to be able to move to that future state, to that result of the change. And the piece that I struggled with many times was that there's a lot of different methodologies, a lot of change management methodologies, but I felt like they were all too dense and complicated. They were like 80 templates to figure out, who was excited about the change. And I thought, well, that's not very effective. So I created the READY model, which is creating a relevant and relatable story of the change. That's the why, right? Understanding the why of the change and create that relevant, relatable story that people understand so they can get behind it. Engaging our sponsors and leaders, advanced communication and advocating for stakeholders, developing and supporting people so they have the training, knowledge, skills, and abilities to adopt that change. And then going for the why is, revisiting that why whenever we see resistance and whenever we're clarifying position, we want to go back and revisit the why.
That's brilliant. I love that, because there's a simple framework. I'm not a huge fan of big templates and lots of templates. I'm a much bigger fan on letting people do what people do really well, which is figure things out. But a little bit of structure helps you do that. Right? So that's really nice. That's a nice, clear picture. So thank you for that. Now, one of the things that you were talking about a few minutes ago, you were talking about this meshing of the teams, right? So this structure helps you do that, and it helps you be successful. But there's another thing here as well. So if you think about the project delivery team, right? You've got a PMO, and part of the role of the PMO. So the difference between project delivery teams, that in fact I think I've got a copy here on my desk. So here we go. There's a little, it's a really scrappy looking infographic, which you can download from our website, that looks at the very best project delivery teams versus kind of the worst. So the top decile versus the bottom decile. So the top decile, right? The good guys, they deliver almost 90% of the projects on time. Right? The guys get it wrong, deliver about a quarter of the projects on time. That's a huge difference, a huge gaping maw. Similar things. The worst project delivery organizations are 7.5 times more likely to go over budget. The best delivery organizations are 3 times more likely to hit the intended business goal. And the big difference between those two types, the best and the worst, is that the best, they don't just do project management, they do portfolio management. So why does that matter? Well, it matters because you're aligning resources with your goals, so you can right-size the portfolio, you can do all those things. But it also matters because you're managing resources across the organization. Right? So this is a very long question to get to a simple point, right? So we know that in project management and resource management, that kind of stuff, that if you manage at the portfolio level, you reduce the risk of collision, you reduce the risk of project delivery. And I'm imagining something similar happens in change management, where an individual project can be chugging along, ignorant of the fact that the portfolio is going to create some kind of change tsunami that'll destroy the organization. So do you want to talk about that for a couple of minutes?
Yes, I mean, I think that is one of the benefits of thinking about your stakeholder as the center, as opposed to thinking about the project as the center. Because if you put your stakeholder in the center of the universe, and then you look at all the impacts around them coming in a particular time frame, that's where you can start to see that maybe we're not in alignment. Maybe we have too many, maybe we didn't recognize the fact that, this change in our payroll system is going to have this huge downstream impact on that individual stakeholder, and how are they supposed to be adopting these other changes at the same time that they're being hit with this really big financials piece that they didn't anticipate. They didn't even know it was coming, but somebody up above them did know it was coming, and they weren't thinking about each of those stakeholder groups. So one of the very first things I think that's important when you're kind of building these pieces is to do a stakeholder identification and assessment. And the assessment that I do is different than many do. Sometimes I'll say I need to do stakeholder identification, and I get a little bit of pushback. Sometimes project teams say, well, we've already done that, and here's our list. And they give me a list of, 30 or 40 people or stakeholder groups. And what I have found is that I need to create the current state for them. I need to create the future state. Like, what does that particular stakeholder group future state look like? And then I want to think about, what are they going to gain from this change? What are they going to lose from this change? There's always loss. And what are they afraid of in this change? And when I put those pieces together, and then I conduct facilitated stakeholder sessions where I bring the business and stakeholders together, what I discovered is we always find missing stakeholder groups. And those stakeholder groups are critically important. I did a project a few years ago where we thought we had everybody identified. I said to the business, is this it? Yes. And I walked through and I said, okay, it says here judiciary. I don't know exactly who is included in this judiciary. A fight kind of broke out with the business and they said, oh, there's like 20 other roles in here. So then it was not just the judiciary, it was all the judges, it was the law clerks, it was the prosecuting attorneys, it was the defense attorneys. And there was this huge list as well as like friend of the court. I mean, they were completely missed. So there was a lot of pieces in there that would not have been prepared for and accounted for if we hadn't had that facilitated discussion. So I like to do this stakeholder identification. Then I sit down with different stakeholder groups and different business groups, and we talk through this identification tool, looking at that gain, the loss, and the fear. And from that point, we can see, oh, this group is really getting a much bigger impact than anybody else. They're going to be, and then we start to map them, like what else is hitting that particular group. If the impact is relatively light, like awareness is enough for them, or maybe awareness and some detailed communication and training, and then they have some support. If it seems like it's relatively contained and we look at all that assessment, we don't see any huge impact, then we can probably say, oh, that seems like that group is set. But many times what happens is there will be one or two groups that you suddenly realize are just in for it in terms of saturation. And so I think that has to go back up to the top to say, what do we hold and what do we go forward with?
Well, and this is interesting. So in all the years we've been doing project prioritization, I can only think of one instance where the PMO team during the prioritization process actually asked the change management question, right, which was, which teams are going to be impacted by this project? And they actually created this unit. I can't remember what they called it, but they created a unit of change management impact. Okay. Right. So, because some projects it's fairly trivial. Other projects, we're going to change everything. So they sort of nominally, fairly arbitrarily created this change impact unit thing. And then for every project, they just they had a list of the 10 key departments, the most, and so it's still quite a rough thing, but the 10 big departments. And they sort of said, right, this project, how many change impact points is it going to have? And at the end, when we were doing the portfolio analysis and doing the prioritization, one of the charts they had was by department, how many change impact points have they accrued? And the reason they did that was because they'd got it wrong in the past. And they'd got to the point where they had the 3 or 4 really great projects, and all of those projects hit the same team at the same, and the wheels fell off, right? Everything just went horribly wrong. So do you have any really good, really bad stories of when this goes wrong?
I do. And, it's a little like kissing and telling, right? I'm not sure that it's something I should divulge it, but I had a project about 4 years ago that was being managed kind of globally. And then each of the different agencies had their own implementation of it. The global project did not have sufficient interest in organizational change management. And so what ended up happening was that they didn't recognize that the lack of, they had not factored in how people were currently using reporting their expenses and receiving reimbursement for personal expenses. And this was a agency department of 14,000 people. And many of probably 60% of the folks in that department were out as end users with the public. So they were doing a lot of traveling to see public, and they're not extremely well paid. I mean, they're the frontline workers, and yet they couldn't get their expenses paid. Now, the global project didn't think that this was going to be a bother to many people because they could put it on their credit card, was what they supposed. But that was, not accurate. I mean, they were putting it on their credit card, but it wasn't being reimbursed, and nobody knew how to get this reimbursed because they didn't actually finish the technology on that side. They thought, well, we'll get to that later. Nobody really needs that. So we ran into a situation where, the system went live. We had done some training on how to use the new expenses and reimbursement piece of this huge financial implementation. And yet nobody could get any money. And they were starting to really lose their minds because their credit card bills were piling up, and they didn't have any way to get reimbursed. They couldn't submit it into the system. So what we ended up doing was we did what we called, expense and reimbursement labs. And we went to every office. We had 80 offices over the state. We went to every single office. We sent 4 trainers per office. Everybody had a 45-minute appointment. They'd sit next to the trainer, and the trainer would watch them and guide them to help them figure out how to use the reimbursement system, how to put their expense in, then how to check and see if it was in there. And then to be sure, to be able to track the reimbursement. And after we did 60 offices, we started to finally see like that wheel started to turn, and people were able to be reimbursed. But it was very stressful, and people were, simultaneously angry and disgusted, as well as desperate, really desperate to be able to pay their credit cards so that they could keep doing the work that they needed to do. And it really, I felt, was very mismanaged. On the global perspective, they didn't understand the stakeholders.
That's a great story. That's a great story because I mean, I'm really glad you picked that one, because it went exactly where I was hoping we'd get to, which is that so change management is a material tool to manage risk, right? So what were the consequences in that case? There were some very human consequences with people stressed out. Oh my God, how do I pay my bills? And if you, especially if you don't have a lot of income, very often people don't have a lot of reserve to pull from either, right? So it's a massive stress. So that's kind of a human level cost. But the cost of sending people around to those 60 offices and sitting down, huge. And the delays and everything else, right? So all of that could have been avoided by spending a little bit of time up front on the change management piece. And I think that's probably a good message to end on, is for this audience, for the sort of very project-centric audience, that the messages I think from this are this isn't about some fluffy people-oriented thing, right? This is about managing and reducing risk, so that, first of all, so that you can achieve the goals of the organization, right? Secondly, and that it needs to be baked in to the process, not an afterthought. And then the final one, of course, is that this isn't change management in the sense of managing change requests.
Right.
It's organizational change management. It's helping the organization get there. So, so I did promise a chance. Do you want to say anything about the book before we
It's available on Amazon. It was a #1 bestseller in both the project management category and, of course, organizational design and development, change management. And I love sharing this really important message about organizational change management and how critically important it is to the success of our projects. And I feel that there's momentum, that people are recognizing and seeing that organizational change management can help them to lead their projects successfully and to realize the benefit of the change, which is the goal.
Brilliant. So you can get it on Amazon. April, thank you very, very much for your time today. It's been a real pleasure. I've learned some stuff, and hopefully the rest of the community will have picked something really valuable from this and maybe changed a few minds. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for the opportunity.